Good morning. Thank you all for being here. As Marty said, we have many diverse perspectives that are being presented at this conference. The first panel is going to be on solarization, solarizing Iowa. So I'm going to invite the two panelists who are in person to come up here and be on the podium. And there are three other panelists that are going to join us remotely. But before we get going, let me briefly give you a lay of the land of this conference, so to speak. This conference is focused on green energy options and information availability about green energy options at the national level, at the local, at the district scale level, at the utility level, at the consumer level has never been more readily available. It's the highest that it has been in US history. Large swaths of consumers are interested in green energy options. And many cities and counties are keen to reduce their energy carbon footprint. And utilities are in fact transitioning to carbon-free electricity sources. According to the Edison Electric Institute, they published a report last week. They said that in this year and the next year, utility companies are investing about $140 billion each year to upgrade their networks and systems. And most of it is carbon-free, reduced carbon energy systems. Yet many challenges remain. Renewable energy in the US accounts for less than 20% of the total energy produced. So there are we have a ways to go. And we hope Iowa can be a leader, hence this conference. And thanks for being here. We'll be part of the team leading Iowa into the green energy future. Now for this particular well, let me briefly describe the panels. First, we have this panel on solar adoption. Then we have a lunch break. During the lunch break, we are going to give out awards to cities and counties and people that have been really championing the cause of green energy infrastructure. There are cities that are doing an amazing job, a few counties that are doing amazing jobs, and people who have been championing this in their communities, in the cities and counties, and we feel that they need to be recognized. So we'd be giving out some awards during lunch, so please do stay for lunch and for the awards. After that, there's going to be a panel on agriculture. Agriculture can be a contributor to carbon emissions, but there's a huge opportunity as well to reduce carbon emissions, and our panelists will be talking about the challenges and opportunities in the agricultural sector. Later this afternoon is going to be the keynote address for this conference, and the keynote speaker, Saul Griffith, is going to zoom in. He's the YouTube videos that you've seen, the speeches are really amazing and good, so we're hoping that you all will be there and join us in this video presentation by Saul. Tomorrow morning, we have two sessions. The first session is focused on difficult to decarbonize sectors. We've seen huge challenges in decarbonizing the residential sector and commercial building sector, and we have panelists presenting a range of opinions on challenges and opportunities there. And our final session tomorrow is going to be on funding opportunities for innovations in technology, innovations in social sciences, and convergent research that can make this transformation happen. The transformation is coming. It's really a question of whether Iowa will be a leader or a follower, and we hope with this conference we'll be a leader in this transformation for the nation. This particular panel, the solar panel, solar energy conversion mechanisms have been around since the beginning of time. Plants have been doing it, right? And technical mechanisms by which humans can harness that energy have been around for about 70, 80 years. Yet, the amount of energy generated in the US that is solar is less than 3%. In comparison, Germany, a country that has a solar potential, as my colleague Bodhi shared with us a few months ago, Germany has a solar potential of the state of Alaska, and 10% of its energy is solar energy. So energy generated within that country is solar. So we have a ways to go. Closer to home, Iowa has a solar energy potential of 21, meaning among the 50 states, it has the 21st highest solar energy potential. But in terms of adoption of solar energy, it is 29th, and less than half a percentage point of consumers in Iowa have solar energy. By comparison, Minnesota is 30th in solar energy potential, so it lags behind Iowa, but it's well ahead of Iowa in terms of adoptions, 15th in the nation. So even in Iowa, we have a ways to go. So what are the drawbacks? What are the challenges to solar energy adoption? Is it cost? Is it reliability? Is it misinformation? Is it access to reliable installers? For these and other things, we have an excellent panel who will shed light on this. Our opening speaker on this panel is Sean Rumery. Sean Rumery is the Vice President for Research for the Solar Energy Industry Association. He's joining this conversation from Maine, and he'll present about national trends in solar energy. Our second presenter is going to be Steve Geyer. Steve is with the Iowa Environmental Coalition, has a long history of working for environmental issues. He's been with the coalition for 3 or 4 years now, and remarkable successes in pushing the cause of green energy and sustainable development across Iowa and other states. Following that, our speaker will be Troy Van Beek, who is the president and founder of a private solar installation company, Ideal Energy, that does commercial scale, large scale, building scale solar installations across Iowa. He'll provide that private sector industry perspective on the challenges that people face. The fourth presentation is going to be a graduate student representing a set of graduate students who've been working with a small community in Iowa, Springbrook. I'm reasonably sure not many people know where that it is, where that community is, and that's okay. Liz will explain where that community is, where the community wanted to have community solar. And the challenges and opportunities in small communities will be presented by Liz on behalf of the student team. Now, final presenter would be Byron, who will talk about this growing, emerging new field of agrivoltaics. So with that, Sean, if you're ready, it's your show.
Great, thank you very much, Jerry. I am going to go ahead and try to share my screen. I am not certain. It looks like I can't share my screen.
Hold on, we'll solve it in a minute.
Yeah. Okay. But while we're getting that together, thanks again, Jerry, for the introduction. My name is Sean Rumery. I'm the Senior Director of Research here at SIA, so thanks for the promotion, Jerry. Appreciate it. And happy to join you today. SIA, of course, is based in Washington, D.C. As Jerry mentioned, I'm up here in Maine. I've worked with SIA for approximately 13 years and work on the research and analytics side. Okay, and it looks like I can go ahead and share my screen now. And can you all see that in the room?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So I'm here to talk about national trends in the U.S. Solar market industry with a focus on opportunities and challenges. Just a little bit about SIA. We're the National Trade Association for the solar energy industry, obviously active in Washington, D.C. And we have active kind of lobbying operations in about half the states nationally. We have 1,000 member companies represent up and down the value chain. So from manufacturers all the way down to installers, and then across market segments, so residential installers as well as utility scale installers. Okay, and so in the U.S. solar industry, we've seen massive growth really over the last decade. We've seen an average annual growth rate of 33% over the last 10 years, culminating in a record year last year in 2021. There are now over 121 gigawatts direct current of installed solar. That's enough to power 23.3 million homes. When we think of the solar industry in the US, we really think across 4 market segments, and they really are distinct market segments. So the residential, commercial, community solar, and utility scale segments. And so as I talk about these segments, I'm going to be treating them separately. The utility scale segment is by far the largest, represents 2/3 to 3/4 of all installations. But the residential segment has been the fastest growing segment over the past 5 years or so. We're up above 3 million individual installations nationally. And what this growth has meant is that solar continues to grab share across the entire electricity grid. So in each of the past 9 years, solar has ranked first or second in new electric capacity added to the grid, so only behind natural gas or wind. In each of the past 3 years, solar has ranked first. In 2021, 46% of all new electric capacity added to the grid came from solar. And so, of course, this has increased our share of total generation from just 0.1% in 2010 to nearly 4% today. SIA has a goal to drive this up to 30% by 2030. And of course, with this increase in deployment has come jobs. So as of 2020, which is the most recent year for which data has been available, there were 230,000 American workers at over 10,000 companies. These workers, again, work across the value chain. A lot of folks, when they think of solar, they think of either manufacturing panels or installing panels. And while those jobs are important, there are many, many other jobs in the industry, from manufacturing the racking that holds the panels to helping with communications, legal, financial, et cetera. The industry is also growing in dollar terms. In 2021, we represented a record $33 billion in direct investment nationally. Much of this growth has been led by falling prices. So over the last decade, prices have fallen by over 60% across all market segments. And prices have fallen faster in some segments, such as residential, where prices to install a typical household system have dropped from about 40,000 in 2010 to 20,000 today. And the systems that are installed today are larger than the systems on average installed in 2010. Meanwhile, utility scale solar, which competes on the wholesale market, is cost competitive with all other sources in most areas of the country. And so prices will range from $16 per megawatt hour to $35 per megawatt hour. And the growth that we've seen in the industry has really occurred across the country. Obviously, there are some larger markets, such as California, but increasingly other states are grabbing share from California. In fact, we expect Texas to soon become a larger utility scale solar market than California, and perhaps eventually a larger market overall. Florida is also a growth market, as well as along with many markets down in the Southeast. In the Northeast, more of the markets are dominated by smaller scale installations, mainly due to the lack of available land for the large scale installations. And so we see more rooftop and kind of large rooftop commercial installations in the Northeast. Importantly, you see, as Jerry sort of alluded to in his opening remarks, you see that there are states here that are in the northern latitudes, which are have a relatively weaker solar resource than states in the Southwest. And so while the solar resource is an important factor in determining how productive an individual solar panel can be, in many instances, the policy makeup of an individual state market is equally as important. As Jerry mentioned, Iowa has a relatively strong solar resource, yet is a little bit behind some neighbors with similar or maybe worse solar resources, such as Minnesota and increasingly Illinois and Indiana. I'm only going to touch briefly on Iowa because other panelists here will speak more directly to the market there. But this chart shows annual installation growth in Iowa. It's a little skewed here by recent installations of large utility scale plants in 2020 and 2021, which makes the distributed segments look smaller, but the state has I'll say a steady distributed market, distributed referring to residential and commercial installations, that has seen modest growth over the past half decade or so, and a growing utility scale market to pair with the vibrant and very large wind market that you see in Iowa. And so through the end of 2021, 450 megawatts of solar installed in Iowa, according to our numbers, ranking the state 31st nationally, 773 solar jobs across 66 companies, and less than 1% of the state's electricity comes from solar. We do expect some growth in Iowa, so over a gigawatt of new deployment was expected over the next 5 years until some recent developments that I'll talk about in just a second. So moving to challenges here. And so the biggest challenge that we faced really over the last year was increasing prices. And this is really the first time that we've seen increasing prices since I've been in the industry. And I should say we've seen sustained price increases. These price increases mainly stem from pandemic-related challenges to the supply chains that are not just seen in the solar industry, but have been seen broadly across all industries, and especially in energy industries. But still, this has really put a strain on the industry as the pricing has created supply challenges, or the supply challenges have increased pricing. And that increased pricing in some instances has led to delays or even cancellations of projects that may not be able to meet their PPA requirements. And so already going into 2022, we were looking at a challenging price environment where most recent forecasts were projecting that prices may not return to 2020 levels until 2024 or so. And that continues to be the case. There's many other challenges that the industry is facing that I'm only going to be able to have time to touch on briefly. And this includes interconnection, and I'll go ahead and combine that with transmission. This is just basically inability, particularly in the Northeast, but growing in other areas, to interconnect projects to the existing grid with a high level of reliability as determined by the utility or grid operator in that area. And so this has led to considerable delays, particularly in the Northeast, but you're starting to see it elsewhere as well. And then transmission, of course, is related to that because we as I think Jerry alluded to, we're going to need to see additional transmission build out to help move solar across the country and across grid interconnections. Equally important, siting and permitting. We are beginning to see some challenges, particularly on the utility scale side and siting projects. Certain communities, as I think this conference will talk about a little bit later, are starting to come up with kind of restrictive zoning ordinances that prevent solar from being even discussed or receiving a permit in those areas. And like other energy industries, we're beginning to see more and more cases of sort of NIMBYism prop up. And that's certainly something that the industry needs to address and that states need to address. State DER policy, and so this is referring to distributed energy resources. And so I'm primarily, I'm referring to a net metering policy here, which is an important remuneration mechanism for distributed solar. And the trend here has been towards less beneficial remuneration, which means that longer payback periods for residential solar, which is obviously a problem and impacts adoption of residential solar. And then, so those are all kind of external problems to the industry, but internally, we're going to need to work on workforce development to meet the ambitious Biden administration goals. We estimate that the industry is going to need to hire up to 1 million workers, so roughly 750,000 new workers by 2035. So that's obviously an incredible challenge. And along with this is diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice issues, both for our workforce to make sure that we have a diverse workforce making competitive wages, but also for any individuals who are installing solar or who are impacted by solar manufacturing or installations. And so that's certainly a front of mind for the industry. But the most important challenge, and I'm going to probably dwell on this for at least a couple minutes, is on the international trade front, because in the last couple of weeks, a major challenge has kind of cropped up that I don't think it's an exaggeration to call it an existential threat to the industry, at least over the next 3 to 5 years. Briefly, a couple weeks ago, the Department of Commerce, U.S. Department of Commerce, initiated an investigation into cell and module imports coming from 4 Southeast Asian countries. This petition was brought by a single domestic manufacturer who was alleging that Chinese manufacturers are circumventing tariffs that were previously placed on China by basically setting up shop in these third-party countries, which many of which are manufacturing solar photovoltaic cells and modules. And so they were requesting that the Department of Commerce place duties that could range from 50 to 250% on all imports from those 4 countries. Now, the reason this is important is because over 80% of all crystalline silicon panels imported into the US come from those 4 countries. It represents 54% of total module supply, as this chart shows. And as you can imagine, importers have basically stopped importing panels from those countries until a determination can be reached. A preliminary determination isn't expected until late August. And so we at SEIA estimate that for every month that this case that remains kind of in limbo, there's 2 gigawatts of imports that will not make it into the country, which is going to basically create an environment in which installers have demand, but have no supply to serve that demand. There's some stockpiling of modules or some inventory of modules, but A lot of it was tapped out over the last couple of years due to the supply chain challenges that I mentioned. And so this is going to start hitting folks right away. Troy might be able to speak better to how it might be impacting his business when he speaks a little bit later, and some of the other panelists may have some other comments there. And so at SEIA, we have a survey out to our members in the industry at large. The latest survey responses, as of yesterday, we have 730 responses. 4/5 of respondents reporting canceled or delayed module supply just for 2022. And as the survey has been in the field, we continue to see kind of growing numbers of folks reporting that their supply has either been canceled or delayed. In terms of impacting deployment, over 90% of respondents are expecting either a severe negative impact or devastating negative impact this year, and that includes 80% of manufacturers. And our initial estimates on deployment loss this year alone are at least 8 gigawatts, which could represent up to a third to even a half of all installations expected this year. And I was actually just on the phone with a colleague right before this call, and we were working on a new model that the initial results from that model are showing 35 gigawatts of impacts over the next 5 years, which represents, for perspective, in 2021, we installed 23 gigawatts. So the deployment loss over that 5-year period would essentially represent more than a year of installations. And then when it comes to workforce, 70% of respondents report that at least half of their workforce is at risk. Again, our initial estimates put the total job loss over this period at around 70,000. So I wasn't exaggerating when I said it was an existential threat. I don't want to be being a fear monger, but we are taking this extraordinarily seriously, and I hope that's the takeaway from this group here. My feeling is that it's solar and wind deployment is the easy win when it comes to decarbonization, right? This is the stuff that should be relatively easy to do, and this is essentially potentially could set us back by 5 years, right? Because it's, as the slide is showing, it could take us at least that long to begin to find additional sources of supply outside that country. So of course, we're looking for the Department of Commerce to issue a negative preliminary determination as soon as possible, such that the industry can kind of lick its wounds and get back to doing what we've been doing for the past couple of years. That said, we do believe that we need a stronger domestic supply chain, and there are provisions that Congress is working on as part of the reconciliation package that would help bring what we estimate, or what has been reported as, up to 20 gigawatts of new supply in domestically. But we just feel like this tariff is not at all the right way to go about doing it, because it's going to destroy the industry that you're looking to support. So on that happy note, let me just move very quickly to some opportunities, and then I'll pass on to the next speaker here. So the solar over the last couple of years has been looking to combine with other technologies to kind of enhance the value proposition. An important one here is storage, and we're continuing to see increased storage deployments across all market segments, so both residential and utility scale, and we expect that to continue going forward, as this chart shows. And utility scale storage is going to increasingly play a larger role in this picture as well. Community solar is a market segment that offers opportunities for particularly residential commercial customers who couldn't otherwise host solar either on site or on their roof. This is something that I don't believe is very popular or common in Iowa, but is very common just kind of north of you in Minnesota, where they have a vibrant community solar market. And this is a great opportunity not just to help homeowners who couldn't otherwise host solar, but to also help low and moderate income homeowners especially. And what we're seeing in the Northeast especially is that many community solar markets are beginning to target those sort of customers as a way to reach out to folks who otherwise have a hard time being served by the market. I know I'm flying through this quickly, but happy to talk about the community solar market in detail during the Q&A. the other important source of demand that we're seeing in the segment is from large corporate entities who increasingly are issuing goals of powering their operations by using renewable energy. Some are even coming up with goals to power their operations 24/7. And so what we've seen is, the renewable energy 100 list has grown from 100 to 88 in 2019 to 350 companies today who have made that commitment. And the current purchases of renewable energy aren't yet enough to satisfy all the commitments that are being made by these companies. And so we expect large increases in demand, particularly in the US going forward from these companies. And that's an important source of demand growth to supplement the utility demand growth that Jerry mentioned in his opening. And so this is all good, but we do need additional support to meet the ambitious but realistic targets that the Biden administration has set. And the targets that the Biden administration has set are really what are needed to avert the worst case situations posed by climate change. And so at baseline, we only make it about halfway to the Biden administration goal, and that assumes that this auction petition that I talked about essentially goes away very, very soon. If that auction petition lingers longer, we're not going to come appreciably close to meeting that Biden goal. But we are hopeful that, assuming this auction petition can go away, which is not guaranteed by any measure, that Congress is able to move forward the package formerly known as Build Back Better, which is now sort of known as the reconciliation bill. And in that bill are important provisions for the solar energy industry, both on the deployment side, but also on the manufacturing side. And we feel like that would get us much closer to the path needed to meet the Biden administration's goals. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop. And I think we're going to take questions at the end, but happy to turn it back to Jerry.
Thank you so much, Sean, for this very comprehensive and extensive lay of the land of the federal side. Thank you very, very much. We encourage everyone in the audience here in person to write down your questions on the note cards that are laid out in the tables. And after all the presenters are done, one of my colleagues will come and collect all these note cards, and we'll pose these questions to their presenter. Those of you who are online, please put your questions in chat as you have been, and we will pose some of those questions to the presenters. Now, each of the presenters will have about 12 minutes to present, and the next presenter is Steve.
Thanks, Jerry. Good morning. Does that work? I'm not sure. Good morning. So I'm Steve Geyer. I'm with the Iowa Environmental Council. I'm the energy and climate specialist there. Jerry asked me to do a little bit more intro in terms of who I am. So overall, I'll just say over the decades, I've worn many hats. So I started out actually as an engineering technician at John Deere, designing electronic monitors and control systems way back. Then basically transitioned to becoming a senior attorney at Iowa Southern Utilities. Worked there, went through the transitions all the way to Alliant, transitioned from there to working on environmental matters. Went from there to Mid-American, where I worked on environmental matters and also environmental counsel for them, including all the subsidiaries that are now known as Berkshire Energy. Then in 2008, I started my own solar firm, which I still run today, and design and install solar systems across Iowa. 2019, I started with the Environmental Council in my current role, but still do the solar. So the council itself is a nonprofit. We have roughly 100 member organizations, and we focus primarily on water and basically energy issues. We're typical NGO in terms of doing policy, research, and advocacy and education. Oh, and staff members, I think we're currently right around 17 professional staff members. So I'm going to take a step back and look at Iowa in terms of our overall renewable picture. So recognize that we just heard the mention in terms of the 2035 administration goal as far as being fossil-free in our energy sector. But we also basically have the recent IPCC report, which in fact says that if we want to meet the 1.5 degrees C, we have to actually be fossil-free in the energy sector by probably 2030. If we're not quite there, I mean, we might be able to meet 2 degrees, but I think even that says we have to be at 82 to 90% reduction by 2030 from a 2019 level, which is a shift. So previous reports have gone back, for instance, to the 2005 level to actually serve as the baseline. But the most recent analysis, again, brings us up to date and recognizes that 2019 is really what we have to use as our benchmark now. So where is Iowa? This chart shows, if we can see it, 3 sources of energy over time. So we've got coal, which basically is shown as the, I guess that's black. You can see that primarily that over time has been decreasing. 2021, you'll see that sharp spike going back up. That's a result primarily of the increased demand that was a result of coming off of I'll just say the strictness of the pandemic. You'll also see basically, however, that natural gas, which is that bottom line, declined in the 2021 timeframe. It was increasing up until then, but that decline directly associated with the cost of natural gas. But then the more important curve is the green curve, which is wind, which continues to basically increase in Iowa in terms of its resource. And in fact, in 2019, you'll see that those lines crossed, where in Iowa, wind actually was a more significant resource than coal or natural gas. So where are we? And so I'm going to look back to 2008, where we were still heavily coal. In fact, 74% of our energy was coming from coal at that point in time. You'll notice that wind, it was starting, but it was only 8%. And by the way, these are resources in Iowa. So when we look at that 10% nuclear, that actually was representing Duane Arnold at that point in time. When we shift to 2021, although we still have nuclear being delivered in the state, it's not being generated here. So Quad Cities, partially owned by MidAmerican. So if we just look at the resources within the state, however, 57% now in 2021 represents wind, and you'll see the dramatic decline in coal, sort of shifting back to those previous curves. If we just go back to 2020, actually wind was 60% of our overall resource. Again, a little bit of a reversal there, but still significant reduction in coal and big basically increase in terms of renewables and wind. So the question always comes to, why? Why are we seeing the increases in renewable? And so this is a chart. So Lazard basically tracks these type of things. And the important thing on this one is that these are unsubsidized costs. And so we're looking at all the various forms of generation, and we'll note that solar and wind, unsubsidized, meaning no tax credits, actually is the lowest cost form of energy today. If we look down in terms of conventional generation, those little gold triangles, this was the 2021 version, that represents existing fossil resources. And so even on existing fossil resources, the wind and the solar represent a more cost-effective way to generate electricity. That's primarily what's driving certainly the wind, but also the increase in terms of solar. That along with, of course, tax credits. And so federal tax credits have been driving certainly wind in Iowa and have been driving solar across the country. And even in Iowa, we have a significant amount of solar, which I'll come to next, being expanded. So I'll throw out some numbers here. Sean basically had some, but in 2021, so we had about actually 289 megawatts of installed capacity. That's increased basically with some additions. Holiday Creek, I believe, came online recently, but there's 3,500 megawatts that's being studied for interconnection basically in Iowa currently. So the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator is responsible for ensuring that not only do we have sufficient capacity to meet all of our demands, but also that we do it reliably. And so you enter what they call their interconnection queue. And so that queue then basically frankly, a matter of years, they study each of these resources to determine whether or not they can do that effectively and what transmission upgrades will actually be necessary to support that. So that's a huge portion of solar. As I pointed out just in the last presentation, some of these may come to fruition, some may not, due to other challenges, and whether that's the tariff challenges, whether that's challenges based on siting, these are things that will all determine whether or not entities actually build them. But as we look at a list down below here, so Worthwhile, East and West, and Big Dave, those are 3 projects that have all been approved by the Utilities Board. Those are all in Northern Iowa by a company called Invenergy. Again, we'll see whether or not those basically will get built, but they are approved. And importantly for those, all 3 of those actually, I believe, qualified for the 30% tax credit. So it may be an incentive for someone to actually move those forward. Clarendara's Coggin Solar, I'm sure many of you have seen the press on that one. That one has received approval from the Utilities Board, but has, I'll just say, some pushback and some of what was previously mentioned in terms of the NIMBYism going on. Holiday Creek, again, that one I believe is already built. And then the other one I'm sure that we've all seen in the press is Duane Arnold, which is 400 megawatts. And importantly, that's the one that Alliant is proposing to actually purchase and then actually also have battery capacity along with that. So I was asked to talk a little bit about legislation. So federal legislation certainly drives a lot of what's going on in terms of the tax credits, in terms of the possibility that, I don't think we'll see Build Back Better, but hopefully we'll see some stripped out portion of that come through in terms of putting federal tax credits back in the sector. If we see that at 30%, that will certainly drive a portion of, I'll just say the incentive to move forward with projects. But let's look at the state itself. So in 2020, net metering was actually mentioned in terms of an important aspect to what drives solar. And Iowa passed that in 2020. Now it passed it for purposes of applying only to Alliant and Mid-American, but it's a pretty good bill. It basically gives full value for all of the excess credit going back to the utility. And if you don't know how solar works, a solar system will always generate excess because of the way it's produced, which then will go back to the utility. And so the incentive is for the utility to compensate at the full value of what you pay for the electricity you buy from them. And so that's what the net metering bill does. It basically will transition at some point to a value of solar. And so right now, it basically is a mechanism where it's offsetting, basically kilowatt hour for kilowatt hour on a monetary value. But when we do the value of solar, which the trigger is either 7 years from 2020, or when we reach 5% penetration. Depending on what happens, we'll see. I'm suspecting that it may end up being actually the 2027 timeline where we'll see then a value of solar implemented. So the Utilities Board will have the authority to investigate what is that solar kilowatt hour actually worth. That is something Minnesota's done. Other states are trying to do it, but that's something that I'll just say is coming down the pike at some point. The tax credit itself. So Iowa had a tax credit. We basically were 50% of the federal. Unfortunately, Iowa tied it back to the 2016 version of the federal legislation, and it didn't bother to then basically amend that and keep up with the amendments that were at the federal level. The result of that was that our tax credit actually expired last year. However, we did basically have a push this year to try and put legislation forth that would reimburse all of the individuals that otherwise qualified for the credit, but because the credit wasn't funded by the legislature, you have basically a backlog of individuals on a wait list. So currently that legislation passed the House unanimously, basically was recommended by the Ways and Means Subcommittee to be passed, and is sitting waiting for the full committee and hopefully Senate, I'll just say, debate and passage. We might see that certainly as a very last minute budgetary item. And then probably the one that is most disconcerting, at least to me, is Senate File 2321. This is, I'm sure, what many of you probably also saw in the press, is it's basically defining where solar can actually be built in Iowa. And so as a part of this bill, it said that we had to be 1,250 feet setback from the nearest landowner. Well, that's hard enough to do, but then the corn suitability rating was also thrown into it, so that if any county had a 65 or greater CSR rating, you couldn't build solar there. Well, when you map that out in terms of what that really meant, so in Iowa, that meant that over 2/3 of the counties, and most importantly, probably the ones that are most, I'll just say, amenable to solar, you could not do that. And so you ended up with the counties that ended up being, for instance, along the two rivers, and many of them, you couldn't do solar anyway. For instance, several were in the Los Hills range, where you couldn't build anyway, or in the Northeast Iowa, where because of the hills, same thing. It's unlikely that you would see it. About the only place that you could find where the CSR was low enough, maybe was in the extreme southwestern corner of Iowa. So it really would have the effect of pretty much prohibiting solar carte blanche within Iowa. So where does that transition us? I want to show you this curve. So as we think about what the IPCC is saying in terms of being able to be net zero by 2050. And just so people are clear into what that really means, it means that on a worldwide basis, and for every sector and every country, that the amount of CO2 that we are putting into the atmosphere, we must have an equal amount coming out of the atmosphere. And so whether that's in forms of sequestration, whether that's basically, again, in the energy sector, saying we have to be carbon free. And so studies have been done to take a look at what does that mean for Iowa? And so as a part of this transition, it means that, for instance, we would electrify everything. In fact, Saul Griffin basically is going to talk about electrifying everything, transportation, buildings, et cetera. And so the studies, a range of 12 of them that we took a look at, and so at a minimum to a maximum, and I'll just point out the maximums. It says by 2050, we will basically have to have potentially 46,000 gigawatts of solar, and basically, or 46 gigawatts and 60 gigawatts of wind by that point in time. So I see Charlie, so appreciate that, and that is the end.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much, Steve. Really good introduction or overview of what's happening in the state of Iowa. Our next presenter is Troy Van Beek. And Troy is the president and founder of Ideal Energy, and he's going to provide a private sector perspective on the challenges and opportunities in solarization in Iowa.
Here. All right. All right, can everybody hear me? Okay,
Yes,
excellent. Okay, excellent. Let me see here. I can share my screen. make sure this works. Does everybody see my Ideal Energy screen?
And Troy, thanks.
Okay, good. Okay, so hi, I'm Troy Van Beek. I am the CEO and founder of Ideal Energy. And I really appreciate the invitation to speak here today. And I really appreciate the previous speakers. Unfortunately, we're going to cover some of the same material, but I think the previous speakers probably did it even better than I could. So I appreciate that. I was asked to speak to the challenges and opportunities of doing large-scale solar projects in Iowa. And Ideal Energy, I have to take it back to our roots. Ideal Energy was actually one of the very first solar companies in the state. We're literally the first operating solar company in the state of Iowa. So when we started our company, I was carrying a solar panel around from library to community center, explaining what it was, and trying to promote the opportunity. And you really have to get scrappy as literally one of the very first solar companies to be pushing renewables in the state of Iowa. Actually, when I went to conferences, they were asking, when I was trying to pick up industry knowledge, what's going on in Iowa? And obviously there wasn't anything. So we had to make it happen. And to do that, we really had to become promoters of our projects. And I've always said that, when we build a solar array, we're building a billboard for our customer, our client. We're building a billboard for Ideal Energy, for ourselves, and a billboard for the industry. So we've, really held ourselves at a high standard. Really wanted to make the installations look beautiful, be productive, and have high value. As a result, we've been a multi-award winning company in doing that. We've also won multiple grants in partnerships with the state, both in battery energy storage and hydrogen. So we consider ourselves leaders in this emerging technology. We've released white papers on both of those subject matters that have been downloaded around the world. And we've held seats on multiple state committees, as I said, with battery energy storage, hydrogen, and economic development through IADA. We say that we're building the next generation of energy solutions. It has really been truly amazing that, these small solar panels, can decentralize the energy paradigm as we see it now. And it gives opportunity for the individuals to take advantage of that. So what we're doing is, we're addressing certain problems to build this industry. We're looking at the high energy costs, both residential and commercial. And we're looking at peak demand management. That demand management is where businesses will have spikes in their energy when they're turning on all of their industrial processes, and that peaks and spikes upward, and that's where the bulk of their energy is being priced out at, because the utility has to keep up with whatever that spike will be. They're looking at it every 15 minutes, and when they determine a spike, they'll bill them for that. So if we'll work with that peak demand and try to reduce that and create value for the company. Obviously, resiliency, corporate sustainability, and carbon reduction. We do that through solar, energy storage, microgrid technology, AI optimized energy management, and now H2 as well as a supplement to that. So looking at the challenges and opportunities, challenges would be the tariffs. As previously mentioned, it is one heck of a blow to the industry to be dealing with these tariffs. And I'll even take it back to the previous administration when it was even murmured that there were going to be tariffs. There was already a spike up to 30% in energy equipment costs because of the rumored tariffs that would be coming on. And now, as Sean had mentioned, with Oxen Solar, this is already occurring currently with the investigation that's taking place. And as also mentioned, labor shortages. We are one of the fastest growing industries in the nation. So compound the fact that we're dealing with general labor shortages across all industries, being one of the fastest growing industries in the nation, that is exaggerated considerably in trying to get the workers that we need to install these fantastic energy production devices here. An unstable economy has been a real challenge. You know, anytime, you know, we're providing a investment to our clients. So this anywhere between, you know, from a residential to a multi-million-dollar installation, we have to have our client feeling comfortable when we're offering this to them. And in an unstable economy, people tend to put the brakes on. The pandemic was a great example of that. When the pandemic hit, all installations came to a screeching halt. Matter of fact, we, you know, to go a step down there to supply chain issues, we had ordered, you know, over $1 million worth of equipment overseas, and everything shut down. So nothing was being produced overseas and nothing was moving across the ocean. So, you know, that was the unstable economy effect, and everybody just put the brakes on it, was buying nothing. So that's been difficult. Of course, the loss of the state tax credits, as previously mentioned by Steve, and the reduction of the federal tax credit at the end of 2022. This is also a challenge, as you know, we feel like we need to be putting the foot down on the pedal and not taking it off. We had promises by the Biden administration, and we haven't seen any of those fulfilled, unfortunately. Now, the opportunities on the flip side, the solar installers are the third fastest growing profession in the nation. This is, you know, an incredible opportunity for developing jobs, business opportunities, and also an investment. So there's a lot of maturation in the investment world. There's a lot of good financial opportunities, you know, new platforms for us to utilize in putting in these projects where they're longer term loans, because it's much more realized at this point. There's a high degree of trust in what a solar plant can do. So we do expect a quadrupling of the industry in this decade. Of course, utilities are now installing large power plants. So as previously mentioned, you know, we're a small portion, you know, for the residential and commercial, where we're maybe, you know, a little over 1% of the total energy profile. When the utilities get on, we're replacing potentially gigawatts worth of energy opportunity when we're looking at reducing the coal-fired power plants or nuclear power plants and replacing it with wind and solar. Battery energy storage has been a great supplementation and opportunity for increasing the amount of solar on the grid. When we're producing all this energy, in the early days, you know, it was said, well, it's intermittent, so it doesn't have a high value, and that was kind of some of the conversations that we had to combat. But with battery energy storage, we help to mitigate those issues. Where it hits the nodes of the grid, we can store that energy instead of shutting down the wind power or the solar, because those electrons have to go someplace. We can store it and give it back as needed. Of course, microgrids, you know, when the pandemic hit and the food was flying off the shelves, we were looking at, I was looking at my solar on my home. I've got almost a completely renewable powered home, but that solar does no good when the grid goes down. So unless you have a battery that would support and act as the grid, your solar shuts down. So adding in batteries to residential homes, businesses, and even communities can have that effect for large scale solar and wind. And of course, AI optimized energy management is the opportunity to balance all of these together, deliver demand mitigation or grid at large, the balance of all these energy production opportunities of renewable sources. And then I continue to mention hydrogen. This is opportunity for long-term storage, which if we produce it through green means, increases the opportunity for the production of solar, but it gives us that long-term storage opportunity So on those nodes and points where we need to store it, we can and give it back when needed. So looking at Americans' energy source is shifting from fossil fuels to renewables. This was previously touched on, but we show, our different types of energy sources: solar, natural gas, coal, wind, and other like biomass and tidal and other sources there. We have seen an ever increasing amount of capacity that is being installed by renewables through solar here. In 2020, we hit 43%, and I think previously mentioned that we were up about 46% in 2021. So these numbers are growing. So this is a really good sign that we're moving in the right direction. And you can see coal on the wane. And we want to see that continue. Obviously, this is a decarbonization event, and I'm definitely all on board with that. So it is still early days in this massive growth opportunity. Literally, we're just scratching the surface on the total potential, and we're very excited about where this is going. I think that it's hard to turn away from the opportunity that is here now. It is and was. It did cross the threshold in 2018 to where, as Steve had mentioned, the cost of solar and wind was a better value than any other fossil fuels. So that continues to be the case and will only get better because of the opportunities of technology increasing. So looking at the current installed capacity, it is expected to quadruple over the next 10 years. And looking at it here, we were projecting out that quadrupling effect, and then also considering the Biden goals, which I have grown weary of. Don't have a whole lot of faith in anything going through our current Congress, but we'd hoped to achieve a much higher status with that. So, we're kind of looking at where we're at here. Hopefully, I'm being pessimistic, and these things will work themselves through, but I tend to lose faith in that, and just got to be scrappy as we always have been. So yeah, Iowa's market is rapidly expanding, and I think previous speakers had added in 2021, which is even is an excellent addition to the 2020 goals. But we were seeing, I think, in Wapello was added into this, which was a really large array, which increased the utility scale solar. So Iowa's market is on track to grow 118% from with 342 megawatts of additional capacity over the next 5 years. And I can see the previous speakers added quite a lot to that. But I knew that Alliant was looking at about 400 megawatts, and I think Mid-American was slated for about 50 just from the publicly traded utility companies. There's other opportunities that are coming on board. So we hope to see those go through. I remain a skeptic on how fast these can go through. I think regulatory and just people or the owners of these potential arrays just need to put their foot on the gas to get them to go through. I know that there's a lot of IUB regulations and things that need to work to their favor. I'm in favor of the utilities really being able to install as much as possible, because that's where the big change happens. So Ideal Energy has really focused on projects that range anywhere from residential to the utility scale. And we've been operating on all those levels. We have made a name for ourselves in working with manufacturers where they're high energy users and the high demand charges, getting them down to where we've placed 100% of their energy usage. And we've done that on multiple occasions with businesses such as this. This was actually one on a brown field. So we made use of the grounds that were unusable and added in a solar array that brought them down to a net zero. Also, we work with universities on this. With this university, we replaced nearly 40% of their energy usage through this and other installations that we did on campus. And we did that with vanadium flow batteries and a tracker system. And this was part of a grant program that we did with the state. So we did write white papers on this. And that was also a pollinator project. And here's the Ames project. We were talking about doing community solar gardens, and this is one that we worked on with Ames. This was an excellent project. It was pretty much pre-sold when they built it through that type of process. We do believe that there should be many more of those. I think it's a great opportunity for municipalities to join with energy production through renewables. I threw in the Wapello solar project just to give you, we had nothing to do with this one, but just give you scale on what is happening in Iowa. This one was over 800 acres of land utilized, powering over 21,000 homes. It's just a sea of panels, just an incredible array. We love to see these large arrays going in Iowa here. We worked on one with Mid-American that was about 120 acres, a 30 megawatt, which was a really neat array as well. And I have to mention H2. I do that because Ideal Energy wrote a grant 2 years back to do a study on Iowa for hydrogen, and you know the opportunities that would stem from that. We saw there was a real advantage of working with hydrogen as a part of the energy paradigm. You know, we can look to electrify about 30% of the grid right now, 30% of the energy profile right now. It's that other 70% where that dense energy carrier fuels are hard to replace. You know, utilizing batteries for the trucking industry, you start carrying more battery than you do payload. And the same with shipping. So just for those alone, it's that energy that's hard to replace. Well, we can make that energy through hydrogen through renewable sources. So we can do that through electrolysis and make green renewable hydrogen. Now, producing hydrogen currently, which we do in the state of Iowa in mass, is one of the most carbon intensive processes in the industrialized world. So because of that, it's a real advantage to produce it through electrolysis. And there's a myriad of products that come from that when we do that. Now, I'm just going to step back 1 second. What we're looking at here in this graph is the wind tunnel of the nation, and Iowa produces its wind in this wind tunnel. So there's an incredible opportunity, not just for Iowa, but for the nation to be producing low-cost hydrogen through that process. Now, we have some of the lowest cost energy in the nation right here in Iowa being produced through wind. And it's about 57.52% of our energy is being produced through wind. But we also have a lot of production of synthetic fuels and ammonia, and those all require hydrogen as part of that. And there's a myriad of different other products, metal refining, and as I mentioned, ammonia. We can upgrade bio oil and biomass and synthetic fuels and transportation, and of course power generation back into the grid. So this, done through renewable resources, wind and solar, which is the best way to produce it because it brings the capacity factor up in hydrogen production to a point where it's competitively could be made currently today. So I think the tax credits and tariffs were covered pretty well by Steve. So I won't get into that. I think I'm already running over, but I'll reserve the rest for any questions that I might have.
Thank you so much, Troy. Really appreciate your. And our next presenter is Elizabeth Heron.
Hello. Hi. So my name is Elizabeth Heron. I'm a graduate student in urban and regional planning here at the University of Iowa. And myself and 4 other graduate students in our program worked on a clean energy action plan for Jackson County this past year. And so I'm here to talk about one piece of that plan and talk about the process and challenges that we ran along the way and recommendations that we have. So to just give an overview, our main question of what we were looking for were what options are available for a small Iowa community to participate in renewable energy. And the community we partnered with is Springbrook, Iowa. So this is located in the center of Jackson County on the far eastern side of the state. And we partnered with this community because the city leadership and the community were really interested in investigating what their options were for solar. And so it was a good project to kind of see what opportunities they have. A little bit about the community. So it's a very small town, about 140 people, 67 households. The median age of 56 and the median income of about 67,000 are both higher than its state or its county, Jackson County, and then the rest of the state. And then its annual energy consumption is about 800 megawatt hours. So why solar? And I'll try to go through some of it's already been touched on a bit, but a big what they talk a lot about is the cost of energy has risen quite a bit. So it's risen about 25% from 2010 to 2020. And these projections are based off of the last 10 years. So if it followed similar trends, obviously there's a lot that goes into how much energy costs. And so this is just a kind of a projection, but many experts are saying that it will rise. It's just unsure of how it will, I guess. And this is really important, especially for small communities where they have a higher, they're more likely to have a higher proportion of their household income going towards energy bills. And so as the cost goes up, the burden continues to get higher for these low income households or smaller communities. And then the declining cost of solar, we heard about some of the issues where the cost is a little bit dependent on a lot dependent on the supply chain issues and so on. But generally the technology is getting cheaper and cheaper, particularly for utility. So the top 2 graphs are residential and commercial, and then the bottom 2 are utility, which have significantly dropped in price. So as the scale gets bigger, the cost of panels are lower. And generally, these are kind of a short list of large reasons why solar is a really great opportunity for a community, for all communities really. And so these are the ones that we focused on. And so kind of going back to Springbrook. So this is our group, and we went door to door to all 67 households and really wanted to talk to the residents. We wanted to hear what their priorities were, what their concerns and experiences were, and what generally their vision for what they want energy to look like in their community. And then we also did a survey. And the main takeaways were they want to see their energy bill go down. They want more control or more of a say of what energy looks like in their community. They want to diversify their energy sources, and they want energy equity, meaning they don't want anyone to be left out just because they couldn't afford it. And they do want to continue their service with their current utility provider with Alliant. And a couple significant things that we took out is they did not cite climate change at all as a priority or as a motivator for why they want to see solar in their community. And they also didn't really see resiliency. So the community hadn't experienced any significant power outages. And so this is similar to the last speaker. He talked about how important batteries are to have a resilient system. So solar panels cannot be resilient against natural disasters unless they have that battery involved. So that was not something we took a lot into or looked a lot into. Some unique opportunities that Springbrook had as a community, like I said, they had city leadership and resident that want to see solar panels and solar systems in their community. They had available city land that was ideal for ground mounted solar. They have a higher median household income than most small communities of their size, and their electric demand is less than 1 megawatts, which provides more opportunity as the facility is. If the facility is larger than 1 megawatts, it requires the grid to be updated with fiber optics, which significantly increase the cost of the facility. And so it's at that nice level of being less than that. And here's a semi-long list of challenges and limitations that we found along the way. So the community is really small and doesn't really have the resources to maintain a facility, and financing the facility is a challenge. So it's a government entity, and so they don't pay taxes, so they can't access any tax credits that are available for private installers. They have a franchise agreement with Alliant Energy, and so Alliant Energy is the sole provider of energy in their community, and the city of Springbrook cannot produce energy and distribute it to their households. And it also leads to a high dependency on Alliant, so they own the infrastructure, they have the grid, and so any community that wants to form its own public utility, it's a very expensive, long, complicated process, and so it's not an option for Springbrook. And virtual net metering also has limitations. The facility, talking about the size, it's a challenge because it's still a small facility compared to these large utilities. And so because of economies of scale, it's not worth financially investing in it for private companies or for the installers, because it's not providing the economic return as these large utility facilities are. And then just the question of, if a third party is investing through a power purchase agreement, kind of the cost analysis between just purchasing the system outright. While there are pros and cons of each, it's a little unsure, and it really depends on the project. And then equity opportunities. So because Springbrook is not providing the energy, that really limits how they can control how equitable the energy is in their community. So generally the facility, how we kind of went about it is we looked through the different ownership models. So either the city of Springbrook hypothetically owns it, they partner with a third party through a power purchase agreement, or lastly, Alliant Energy owns and operates the facility. So if the solar is just for the city services, so street lights and government buildings and so on, at max demand, it's about 40 kilowatt hours, at least cost 50,000, but probably a lot more. And the only option is for the city to purchase it themselves. Not saying a third party PPA is not an option. It's just very not likely, because again, they're looking for the bigger scale utility systems, which from when we talked to solar installers, it was about 250 kilowatt hours for ground mounted, 500 kilowatts for roof mounted, at least, for them to have interest in investing in the system. And then for Alliant, for Springbrook, they wanted to see a range between 200 kilowatts and that 1 megawatt, so they wouldn't have to update the grid. And so for the whole community, so this is including all the households, again, the city of Springbrook and partnering with them, they are not able to distribute energy. So for them, they could not create or install a facility for them to distribute energy. So the only really option is for the utility provider to do that. And Alliant Energy has a program called customer hosted solar projects. And that's where they own the infrastructure, which is ideal for them. So they know that the state is transitioning to renewable energy, and their opportunity is to own the infrastructure. And so that is the only option for a community solar project. And so we met with the Jackson County Energy District, Jackson County Economic Alliance, and our group met with Alliant this last February, and we presented why Springbrook would be a good opportunity. So Alliant Energy, as you saw a lot of the graphs, they're doing a lot of solar projects in the last 2 years. And so we pointed to their renewable energy goals. We pointed to projects that were similar to Springbrook and how Springbrook could be part of help them meet their renewable energy goals. And it was a very pleasant conversation, and they listened to us, they asked questions, and they took the application and passed it on to their engineers to assess the infrastructure to see if it could hold a facility of little less than 1 megawatts. And we just received word this month that it was denied. And we're still kind of pushing. The details are a little fuzzy and kind of vague. So we're still pushing, but essentially they said no. And so some of the local and state recommendations that we offer is for distributed solar. So when you put solar panels on your home, there's a lot of interest in the community to be involved in that. And so just encouraging and educating and helping the community find resources to alleviate some of that upfront cost, or to create incentives to help them do so. And they could put some solar on their own buildings and for their own services. And they could explore a PPA if there is potential interest, but it is unlikely. And there are grant opportunities as well. For centralized solar, they're really going to have to pursue a partnership with Alliant. Alliant, I think, has there's opportunities for Alliant to potentially partner with them in the future. Just because it doesn't happen this year doesn't mean it's impossible. And so this just puts Springbrook on the map of a potential project, I guess. So, and then also incorporating clean energy objectives in their franchise agreement when they renew that. And so that will really make it clear that clean energy is really important to the community, and they want to see it expanded as an option. And then quickly, some state recommendations. Again, the clean energy objectives in the franchise agreement, increase grant and funding opportunities for government entities and nonprofit. The Iowa state tax credit is really important for private investors to want to be a part of these projects. And then encouraging solar ready building codes, which while solar may not be available for all communities, they can help get their buildings and infrastructure ready, so when the time comes, they'll be ready to go. And then meter aggregation and virtual net metering. Thank you.
I'm up.
Yes, Byron, you're on.
All right. Hi, Hawkeyes. How y'all doing? Hey, I'm here in Boulder County, Colorado. I can't quite hear how many folks are out in that audience. Can somebody shout out a number, or the crowd give a holler or something? Not a little bit. There we go. Well, I'm an alum of University of Iowa. I went to the College of Engineering back 2004. So it's nice to be able to chat with folks. I'm also the owner of Jack Solar Garden, the director of Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center here in Boulder County, Colorado. And for the most part, you've been hearing folks talk today about the output of solar panels and maybe the amount of area that a solar array takes up. But I haven't heard anybody talk about what they do underneath the panels, about the land beneath it that's also precious to us. And I want to talk about that today. This is something called agrivoltaics, where you combined agriculture or land stewardship with photovoltaics. And there's synergies that are involved between solar panels and the ground beneath it. So crops beneath the panels are able to get some shade. They get the benefits of having less stresses on the crops. The shade helps to keep more moisture in the ground by not having as much evaporation from it. And the panels can be cooled a little bit. As the plants transpire, they create a humidity underneath the solar panels, and that humidity can help to cool the solar panels. And the cooler the solar panels are, the more electricity that can be produced. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory and University of Arizona have shown that they could increase between 1% and 3% of power output from having just vegetation underneath solar panels. Here's a little bit of a drawing that Arizona and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory created a little while back, just to help to show off some of these attributes. And I'll be showing more pictures of what we're doing out here at Jack Solar Garden, so you get a better hint of it. But again, it helps to redistribute water. It can have habitat for a variety of different types of plants beneath the solar panels, and reduce stresses. A lot of crops end up shutting down during the course of the day because it gets too hot. I don't know about what the temperatures are in Iowa these days during the middle of summer. Out here in Colorado, we get 14 hours of sun during the middle of summer, and it can be over 100 degrees. A lot of our crops shut down. They start to wilt. They can't photosynthesize anymore. They're not producing sugars. They're not producing what we want. But with a little bit of extra shade, maybe they don't do optimal amounts of photosynthesis, but they at least continue photosynthesizing to some degree. So what I want to show you, words are a nice thing, but pictures, they really tell the story. So this is a welcoming to my family's farm, Jack Solar Garden. We have 24 acres here in Boulder County. My grandfather, Jack Stingery, he's the one that purchased our land back in 1972. He used to hay farm, and he had this north pasture, and we have 3 of them. This is about an 8-acre field that you see here that had been in hay production, man, almost 50 years, up until 2020, when we built Jack Solar Garden, a 1.2 megawatt community solar garden. That's over 3,276 panels, enough to power for about 300 homes. And we elevated those panels up higher so that we could actually do management of the land beneath the panels. If you put the panels so low that they're like 6 inches off the ground, you can't do anything underneath the panels. Like barely a rabbit's going to fit underneath there. So we put our panels where the torque tube would be normally at 4 foot here in Colorado, up to 6 feet for 2/3 of our property, and up to 8 feet for another third of our property. So there's ample space underneath our panels to be able to work, be able to have events, and I'll show you. But first, here's some aerial views of what we're doing out on our land. Within these images, you can see that there's areas with grass, there's areas that are brown. This was taken in June of last year when we were tilling and prepping the land beneath the panels. But we divided up our 4 acres of solar panels into different plots where we have partners from, where we have partners from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, Colorado State University, and University of Arizona, doing research underneath our panels to learn more about water moisture movement, ecosystem services, what types of pollinator habitat will do well, what prairie grasses and other pasture grasses will do well within our system. And also we work with Sprout City Farms, that's a local farming organization, to actually cultivate crops underneath our panels. And last year they cultivated about 1 acre of that 4 acres and grew well over 8,000 pounds of food. And you'll see more pictures of that here in a moment. But what I want folks to know is that the space within a solar array is simply that. It's space. It's space that we can utilize. It's space for people. It's space for interesting activities to occur. It's space for vegetation. Any solar array that's just barren dirt beneath it is wasting an opportunity to use the land beneath those panels. And also, it's, as I mentioned in my first couple slides, it's a possibility for synergies where the having vegetation underneath the panels can help to cool the panels over the course of the summer, and therefore increase electricity production. And what solar array doesn't want to have increased electricity production? So it's a wasted opportunity if folks aren't doing something more with their land. Here in that top middle picture there is from a farm to table event that we had last season at the end of our first growing season out here, where we had over 120 people hanging out underneath our solar panels. We had a bluegrass band come out, had a little shindig, folks were dancing. We had plenty of food and drinks for folks, and it was a good time. That bottom right-hand picture shows a little bit of dancing where we work with artists on our land, and you can see those tomatoes there growing. As I mentioned, we work with different researchers from National Renewable Energy Laboratory, Colorado State University, University of Arizona, to learn more about what's going on underneath our panels. Top middle picture is of CSU students collecting biomass of different types of grasses underneath to better understand at what point within our solar array do grasses grow best. And what we're finding, it's on the east edge of our panels because snow collects during the winter time and it dumps off east as the panels tilt to the east. So you have a large amount of stored water beneath that soil that the grasses utilize in the spring to get going. Far left picture is also from CSU, where they're mapping out how they're going to study CO2 sequestration within the land underneath our panels. That top right picture, that with the goofy smile, that's me. I'm planting in different medicinal crops underneath our panels to better learn about what perennials are like within our system. But the sexy thing people love to see are the crops, the annual crops that we grew. So Sprout City Farms, and here was the farm manager last year, Brittany Stye. She was growing on the far left. You have zinnias and green beans. In the middle, you have tomatillos and carrots. And far right, you have tomatoes. They also grew eggplant, cabbage, lettuce, leafy greens, kohlrabi, beets, turnips. Oh man, the kale went for days. They're growing garlic out there right now. We're going to be testing out potatoes and melons and more this season, just to better understand where within the solar array do different crops do better, so that in the future we'll have a better understanding of where we should plant what crops and also at what time of year. But hopefully you all can see this little video. This was taken by the University of Arizona Biosphere 2. This helps to see what it's like of somebody just walking within the solar array next to our tomatoes. And on the right side, there is eggplants. And then first thing in the morning, as our panels start tilting to the east, you can see how that sunlight just transitions. Note that there's a lot of shade. Oftentimes people are thinking, you know what, nothing grows in the shade. That doesn't make sense. But folks, those people haven't spent enough time in forests where you see plenty of things growing out in forest, right? Maybe not these types of annuals, but at least there's vegetation that can grow with partial shade. And here in Colorado, where it's so hot during the summer and it gets really dry, having a little extra shade is very helpful. Here's a quick time-lapse video from early in the season last year, where you can see our panels move, and the women that were working out here also moving really fast. But you can watch as the shade transitions over their field, as well as the sunlight. So every part of our field gets sunlight as well as shade. It just depends on how much. In the middle of that row, it's getting maybe 25% shade, whereas at the edges of the solar panels or just underneath the panels, it's getting closer to 50% shade. Temple University recently came out with a study that I enjoy looking at. Is they were finding that pasture grasses actually did better. So timothy, orchard, brome grasses, alfalfa, they did better with 45% shade than they did out in the open. We have a large pollinator habitat that's around the perimeter of our solar array for the birds and the bees. Audubon Rockies helped put this in for us. It's about an acre of land, over 3,000 perennials that we have out there, from raspberries, blackberries, elderberries, and so forth, for helping out the birds. Just this morning, I took a picture of a great horned owl hanging out underneath our solar panels, looking for prey. So that was pretty cool to see. Jack Solar Garden has an Artist on a Farm program where we give a stipend to an artist each year. First year was a mixed assemblage artist. Last year was a dancer that brought out kids to dance underneath the solar array. And this coming year, we have a photographer that's going to put models out within our solar array and hopefully show a different side of solar. So that ought to be fun to see. And also within our solar array, we're able to teach folks. We have, through the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center, opportunities for students to come out, tour our land. We focus on high schools as well as college students. And this helps us to create a community, a space where people can come out, experience our land, better understand what solar panels, or how solar works, what agrivoltaics look like. So folks that want to sign up for tours, you can go to our website, Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center. Just Google that. You'll find us, sign up for tours over the coming summer. But it's not just the youth that we work with through our nonprofit. We also have tours for adults, events, as well as volunteering. And then we work with policymakers. We were able to be the impetus for a bill that got signed in, a Senate bill that got signed in last year that put $150,000 of state capital towards researching agrivoltaics. And this year there's a new agrivoltaics bill going through that's going to put even more funds towards sponsoring agrivoltaic projects in the middle part of the Colorado. But important policies that folks need to focus on at that level are looking at getting that ITC refundable. That will really help out farmers, because if it's a non-refundable ITC, that's the federal tax credit. That means you have lots of different players in the middle that take away some of the money that farm and landowners like myself can't access. So I'd love to talk more about that in the questions, and I can talk more on other policies at the state and local levels too that can help support agrivoltaics. I always love to show off all of our partnerships and our subscribers. People that actually purchase the electricity from us are on the far right-hand side. Everybody pays a premium to be involved with us because we're doing a hell of a lot more with our power than any other solar array that you'll find around by having all these additional events out there. So these folks appreciate what we're doing for our community and support our activities. With that, that's Jack Solar Garden, friends.
Thank you so much, Byron. Thank you very much. We have several questions from the audience here, and I'm going to pose those questions, and whoever in the panel wants to go and answer those questions, please go ahead and answer those questions. Now, as you might have noticed, I've failed in my job as a moderator, and we have very little time left for questions, but we can shift things around and take about 15 to 20 minutes. We put a lot of time for lunch. And so rather than ending at 12:15, we're at 12:10 now. We could probably end at 12:30. Lunch has arrived, and at 12:30 we can break and go for lunch. And while we're having lunch at 12:45 or so, we'll announce the awards. So we have some time for discussion and questions. Again, my fault for not doing my job as a moderator, but the presentation is very interesting. So question. What are the industry recommendations for training the solar installation workforce? Is college education required for these installation jobs? Would any of the panelists like to respond to that question?
Troy might be able to speak better to this at an individual level, but absolutely not. You don't need a college degree to install panels. There are industry certifications that, seeing where Troy came on, I'll let him speak to.
No, I was happy to hear you speak, Sean. I mean, you're nailing it. It's true. I mean, to be an installer, you don't need a college education, but there's obviously lots of moving parts throughout the entire process. So, as part of the selling process, we are delivering, investment grade projects here. So there is, a degree of competency that is required at the higher levels, but there's a lot of work to be done that doesn't require that college education within the whole process.
Yeah, and just to add to that, as I mentioned earlier, 230,000 solar workers. A good chunk of those are installers, so folks who are actually working with the panels, either up on a roof or in the field. But as Troy mentioned, engineers, lawyers, financiers, advocates, communicators, and so it's a varied field. You can, when folks are applying for jobs with SIA, we accept almost any degree types, in addition to folks who don't have degrees, and so it's a pretty diverse workforce.
Thank you. Next question. Could someone speak about the lifespan of solar panels and end-of-life recycling? Please.
Yeah, so I'll just say basically the lifespan. Right now, we're going to divide that universe into crystalline panels and basically thin film. On thin film panels, you're looking maybe 10, 15 years. Primarily, those are being utilized within, I'll just say utility scale. Crystalline panels, we don't know fully. That's 40 years plus is a projection. As far as end of life, I'll just say the DNR is working on that. There is actually a subcommittee dealing with material management being led by SCS engineers. And it's not just renewable, but renewables are one of those subcategories. What we're finding so far is that most of the manufacturers are looking at that already. Many of them are agreeing to take those panels back. And even the ones that basically aren't agreeing to that, we're seeing industries pop up. At this point in time, there's not a huge number of those that are available given that lifespan, but that is something that's being addressed, and we believe it will be resolved by the time those panels actually become numerous.
If I could just add to that, what Steve says is absolutely correct. On SEIA's end, we're working to create a national network of recycling vendors who will accept those panels. Obviously in Iowa with a low level of solar penetration, there's not such a demand for that right now, but as the materials grow nationally, we're expecting to see a lot more demand there.
Great. Next question. It seems like there is no net metering in rural co-ops. Is this true? And if so, why is this the case?
Yeah, I'll start on that one. That's been a long running issue since the very beginning of net metering policies. Primarily, the investor owns have agreed to do that. Both the municipals and the RECs have not. And so when the legislation came forward in 2020, it was acknowledged that if it included RECs, it would not make it through the legislation or legislature. As far as, the definition of net metering, your cooperatives, by and large, will tell you that they do net meter, which they do. It's just that they only compensate you for that excess at a wholesale or their avoided cost rate, which usually tends to be somewhere in the 2 to 3 cent range.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else from the panel wants to add to that?
I deal with it all the time. There's over 180 different utility companies in the state of Iowa. And only the 2 major utilities, Alliance and Mid-American, are really doing full net metering. So there is varying degrees within all of those utilities that they do, as Steve mentioned, they term their own net metering policy. And some do it, they true up on a moment-to-moment basis, and some will true up on a monthly basis. And the monthly basis ones can work. They're just very few and far in between. So that is one of the biggest limiting factors in the state of Iowa.
Great, thank you. Next question. Are airports good candidates for solar?
They can be. There needs to be studies that are done with the implementation of the solar. There's a special study that can be done to make sure that the reflectivity isn't something that would be distracting to pilots. But there are airports, and is it Byron probably could speak to the large installations in Colorado that are next to the Denver airport. But they're also, there's nothing precluding us from doing it here. And Ames is close to the airport, and there was a solar study on that as well.
Okay, next question. The number of electric vehicles on the road is increasing. How is that going to affect demand for electricity? And how can solar play a role in that?
Yeah, I can start on that one. Certainly, as the studies looked at, again, electrification of the economy, that was part of that's taken into that last slide I showed, as far as projecting what by 2050 Iowa would actually need. And so that included electrification of transportation, electrification of the building sector. And so yes, as we move forward, as that tends to become, and as you've seen, the auto manufacturers are already saying at a certain point in time, they will stop producing anything other than electric vehicles. And so that led to that projections in terms of potentially 46 gigawatts of solar and 64 gigawatts of wind by 2050.
And just to add to that, Steve, from a national perspective, so the Biden the Biden goal, assuming just like marginal increases in electricity load, works out to about 1,200 gigawatts of solar, if you assume solar is going to represent about 40% of the generation by 2035. But if you assume near 100% electrification of all sectors that could be easily electrified, you're looking at closer to 2,000 gigawatts of solar deployed. So it's a near doubling if you assume mass electrification.
Well, Sean, I have a question for you. You have a general sense of which states are supporting solar much better than other states. So from your national perspective, which are the states that have the best pro-solar policies? And what can Iowa do to become more pro-solar?
Well, I want to be careful here. I mean, California obviously is kind of the template for a lot of states, but what they're doing there isn't going to work everywhere, right? And so I would really defer to the folks on the ground there, especially Steve, because it sounds like he has a finger on the kind of political pulse of what's going on there. And so it needs to be something that complements, what locals in the state want. So yeah, you certainly, but you need comprehensive policy. So I'll just say some general things. You need something long-term. You can't have something that, Troy will know this term, companies are tired of riding the solar coaster where you kind of move in fits and spurts. You need something that's going to create long-term certainty for not just the installers themselves, but financiers and sources of demand. So that's probably the most important factor in any policy, that it needs to be long-term and it needs to be clear and transparent. And I also think you need comprehensive policy. So you can't just jack up one segment, right? You can't just look at the utility scale segment for Iowa and say that that's the only option. We're just going to represent, try to do what wind did for Iowa with utility scale solar. But I think you need to also look at distributed options. And I think the full package is important. And I think Troy and others did a good job showing how storage, hydrogen, EVs can all work into that mix. So I know that was general, but I don't want to be too prescriptive without knowing a ton about the market.
Steve or Troy, would you like to add to that?
I'll add real quick. I mean, as I look at sort of, and actually Elizabeth had it on her slide, things, we've already talked about the aspects of net metering, but certainly within Iowa, a net metering policy that applies to all entities would certainly be beneficial. And the other aspect, which she had on her slide, was virtual net metering or aggregate metering, which was discussed this year, but didn't actually move through the legislature. That makes a big difference. That actually allows this current roadblock in terms of distributed. Not everyone has a space to basically put solar on their property. But if I can aggregate with my neighbors, and there's property that then allows us to apply all that production to our respective utility bills, that's a huge, I'll just say, motivator to move solar forward.
I would just add to our neighbor in Illinois, their block grant program has been extremely successful. I think there is probably better ways we can look at that and say that we could do it even better. I don't know that it has to be dumped as rapidly as it was. They could probably reduce the cost of solar and add in a lot more production as a consequence of just regulating it a little bit better. But obviously, we want to get as much of it in the ground as possible, and I think that they show an excellent example on how to do that.
Great. I'd like to provide a couple of minutes for the panelists to ask questions to each other. So if Steve, you have questions for Sean or Troy or vice versa, please go ahead.
I've got a quick one for Sean. I mean, and we'll talk about, and maybe I missed it in your presentation, but sort of what SEIA sees as potentially the resolution to the tariff/investigation issue.
Yeah, that's kind of the question that's front of mind for everyone. I'll be honest, it's a coin flip on what Commerce decides. Technically, the Commerce decision is supposed to be like kind of quasi-judicial and immune or separate from political influence. But I think a lot of folks in this room know no government process is immune from political influence. And so we're certainly doing as much as we can on the SEIA side to make sure that the Biden administration and that Congress understands the implications of this decision. And it's something that's really under the radar right now if you're not in the solar industry, but we're trying to make it a bigger deal. And so I'm not going to forecast either way what I think a likely outcome is, because honestly, we don't know at this point. But there, the resolution will come hopefully earlier than late August, but Commerce has all the way until late August to issue a preliminary decision. If it's negative, that means that the case is pretty much done. But if their preliminary decision is positive, that means that we wait another 6 months for a final decision. And once that final decision is in place, we probably have 5 years of pain until we can figure out new supply chain options. So I think that in the meantime, if Congress can get moving on the Build Back Better provisions, which the clean energy provisions are still alive. I know Troy and Steve seemed a little pessimistic on the prospects there, but we're still fairly optimistic on the SEIA side that there is some opportunity for movement to move the manufacturing provisions and the deployment provisions. If it's going to happen, though, it's going to happen in the next 3 months. By the time we get to August, Congress is pretty much shutting down for midterms, and so that's what I would look for. And we're I'd say more optimistic than you guys are on it, and we'll continue to push hard.
Glad to hear you're optimistic on that. Someone needs to be. I definitely remain skeptical, but I could augment the question to Steve just on the state tax credit, on why you see that the state tax credit needed to be removed. In lieu of the state doing so well financially, and seeing how much of an investment that was made based on that small nominal contribution from the state.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I was disappointed that actually it was not viewed as something to continue last year. But in terms of, I'll just say my optimistic view is that if in fact we see the federal legislation move forward, in particular, if we happen to see that approach back up to the 30% level, that maybe Iowa would then view that as the impetus to actually reinstate the tax credit for Iowa, which again, even if it was basically, the previous aspect of 1/2 of, I mean, those are huge motivators in terms of basically individuals moving forward with solar, and more importantly, if we take a longer view of this and recognize that in terms of the climate change aspects, it all has to move aggressively forward, whether it's distributed resources or whether it's utility resources. That's maybe too complex, but that's my answer.
Byron, are you still there?
Oh yeah, I'm listening.
Okay, good. We can see on the screen. Byron, what should states do to promote agrivoltaics?
I see states as being able to put in place carrots and sticks. You got to have some means of incentivizing farm owners and landowners to work with solar developers so that either there's a financial benefit or better access to land for solar developers if they do agrivoltaics. I know in Iowa or at least I've heard in Iowa that they've made it so that solar on prime farmlands isn't accessible. If I'm wrong on that, sorry, but that's what I heard. And if you're going to, and I don't oftentimes, or I don't disagree with that idea, but if the solar is able to put if a solar developer is able to put solar on farmland and still be able to allow that land to be utilized, that totally makes sense to me. And that I don't think that should be stopped. The stick side, I don't think solar developers should be compacting the land, beating it down and just allowing for weeds to be growing underneath of it. Sometimes I've seen folks throw sheep out underneath it and allow sheep to eat weeds, and sheep don't really grow well on weeds. And so the folks that are sheep herders still have to take them off to some other site to get good food. So there's a lot of design implications that need to go in up front to make sure that the land is still usable for either animals or for crops or for biodiversity or anything else underneath it. Otherwise, we're just wasting a resource underneath solar panels. I mean, you can produce electricity above ground, and then below ground, you're storing carbon, you're storing water, you're growing crops, you're growing vegetation, you're having a habitat. You know, it makes sense. And I think states should be pushing for that and getting solar developers to think about it more so.
Yeah, we actually had one additional aspect to that, and basically we were looking at the aspects of the conservation reserve program. And so as we come back up on the farm program, and as we come back up on, the reauthorization of conservation reserve, modifying the rules under conservation reserve to say that solar is a compatible use on conservation reserve. And so it gives both the incentive to, I'll just say, lower the cost overall of solar, but also improves the soil as the aspect of conservation reserve.
Yeah, thanks. That's a wonderful perspective. Liz, you worked on this very small community of 67 households. Do you think the challenges that you face there are challenges that larger communities would also face? One, and second, do you think that community solar has a bright future in small communities across the state?
Well, from what I think the first question, just to clarify, is whether the small communities, the challenges are similar to the larger communities. Okay, yeah. Well, the challenges that Springbrook had were fairly different than just say a size of Iowa City. And so the resources available, the density of the population, and the cost of energy are generally higher the farther away you are from the urban centers, or the less dense you are. And so there are similarities, but there are unique challenges to the small town in these bigger scale solar that we found anyways. And then the second question about kind of the future of community solar in small communities, I would say at the moment, there's so much dependency on the utility company, and particularly with net metering not being available generally for public utilities. That is a big limiting factor on especially governments partnering with PPAs. That's not really an option if there's no net metering available. And so at least right now, it doesn't look like it will be an option, but in the future, if policy allows, that's what I'd say.
Great, thank you very much. So I see that it is 12:30. So why don't we end the session now? Let's give the panelists a big hand. This has been very illuminating. To everyone here, lunch is right behind you. Please go and help yourself, and we'll reconvene at 12:45 for the award session. The panelists who are virtual, please, we wish you could join us for lunch here, but thank you very much for joining us, and we'll be in touch. Thank you very much.